Good evening, gentlemen. And to you, Tom, good evening for the fourth time, I think now.
G'day, Mark. Yes, I think so.
People are
Well,
going to start talking.
You're already getting the odd comment, I noticed.
It's like the
yeah,
fifth beetle.
had to settle a few punters down. Yeah.
The fifth beetle, maybe. Maybe that's what it is. A quartet. For those listening and watching, we've asked Tom on to give us the best he can update of what's happening in regards to the gun laws out of the national level. As you probably know, Tom he's been all over camera. He's there every day working hard. So we've asked him on to give us an update and also try and get an understanding of a couple of questions that are starting to pop up. So, Tom, we're going to put you on the spot tonight.
Yep, cool.
Hope you're okay. So, I suppose the first thing before we get into the questions, where are we at in terms of gun laws for shooters in Australia?
Right. So, well, we obviously started with Bondi. So 15th of December, there was the Bondi terror attack. Two shooters, one of whom was licensed, one wasn't. Immediately out of that came the knowledge that ASIO knew about the son who was not licensed. And then it got a bit murky, right? Because New South Wales haven't clearly said whether they knew or not about one of the shooters, the son, and his terrorist activities. So there is an unusual time period between him applying for his license in 2020 and receiving it in 2023. That's a 3-year period. Normally that license in New South Wales, a license period is about 3 to 6 months. So for some reason, there was a big delay. New South Wales knows what that reason is, but they haven't told anyone, not in public. And so it's not clear whether ASIO didn't transmit the information to New South Wales or whether New South Wales received the information but didn't take the appropriate action, because he never should have passed that fit and proper person test and he shouldn't have got a license in the first place. So that's sort of the starting point. Is our view is this is not a failure of law, it's a failure of the gun laws we have are adequate to have dealt with that situation, had New South Wales Police known or had they followed the law correctly if they did know. So, and that's not sure, it's not clear whether they did or didn't know.
So for clarity there, so what you're saying is this isn't a failure of law, i.e. there was a loophole that someone got around. This is a failure of process.
Correct. That's exactly what we're arguing, is that the laws were sufficient. He could have and should have failed the fit and proper person test and therefore not been issued a license. But for some reason, either the information wasn't transmitted or if they received it, they didn't treat it appropriately. So something's gone wrong in the background there. And that's what an inquiry hopefully will find out. So that's what happened. Then very quickly afterwards, I think it was almost the next day, on the 15th of December, there was a National Cabinet meeting. Minns was out the next day, so he wanted to do something on gun laws. National Cabinet met the next day. They agreed to do something on gun laws. And then within a week, Minns had legislation in the Parliament, and that basically moved straight pull rifles, and some other lever actions, lever release and button release firearms that moved them out of A and B and into C and D. So that they categorized them. And the big thing, of course, was the limits. So they introduced a limit of four firearms for hunting and 10 if you're a sports shooter, like a target shooter or whatever else, or a farmer or a professional shooter. So they were completely arbitrary limits. They arrived at a limit of 4 because Minns went out and said he was going to have the toughest gun laws in the country, and 4 is one less than 5. And 5 is Western Australia.
Yeah.
That's how scientific it was. There's no more or less than that. It's headline grabbing stuff.
Sorry to interrupt you again. So this definition of sport shooter, do we have a understanding of what that definition,
So a sporting shooter is anyone
bolts of
who does target shooting, basically. So a member of a shooting club who shoots at targets in competitions.
So does that categorize certain guns into that? So if I'm a clay target shooter, am I automatically now allowed 10 guns of A and B category of my choice?
Yeah, I'm assuming that's true.
Awesome.
That would be just because you're a member of a club and you do competitions, then I assume you would, and you'd need the I think it's number one on your license for reason for owning, or what how they have categories of what firearms you're allowed to have access. One is club shooting, 2 is target shooting, 3 is hunting, something like that. And so immediately you fall into club shooting, which gives you access to the 10.
Okay.
They're not as strict. Western Australia was very strict about definitions, I think, and reasons to own. And in general, you can have the 10, and it's hard to cross. I don't think they police the crossover between the two. Anyway, it's all new. They haven't even
Yeah.
most of the act isn't even enacted yet. They haven't worked out the buyback. They haven't worked out any of the details of any of that sort of stuff. So it was a very rushed process. It was very unscientific, and it was very unpopular amongst the shooting community. But it is probably the biggest market in the country, and it is having an effect. A lot of the dealers over there are struggling. A lot of their businesses dropped by about 75%. And one thing that they did do was make it that you had to be a member of a club. So everyone, even hunters, I think, have to be a member of a club there.
Yep.
So that's going to be interesting. Then we'd been in contact with the federal government. They couldn't give us a timeline, but they were moving very quickly. So we were talking to them over the whole period. We put letters in backwards and forwards about what the national cabinet process should look like and when we had a view on what would be a reasonable set of changes, and all focused around improving the communication between the federal and state governments, and how we might use the new National Firearms Register to flag people for intelligence, to seek further clarification and things like that. And so we put those ideas to the feds. They seem to have their own ideas. They didn't seem to pay too much attention to that. And they came out with the Prime Minister announced he was going to recall Parliament, and they put out a draft bill, and they gave us, in the end, it was about a week from the draft bill coming out to the bill being passed. The first draft came out, and it was pretty clunky. They tried to ban clothing, ammunition, accessories, they called it. So, vests, shotgun vests for clay target shooting, cartridge belts for Western action shooting, pouches for ammunition for when you're hunting, magazine pouches if you're doing pig hunting or whatever it is. All of that stuff they wanted to ban. In the end, they backed down on that, so that didn't come in. They had a very broad definition of using a carriage service. They were trying to prevent people using the internet to look up 3D printing of firearms and how to print and print files and everything. I think that's a reasonable thing to do, but their clause was so badly worded that there's a pretty good chance it would have included looking up reloading data for ammunition and everything else like that. They did tighten that up, and so it's not as bad as it was. I don't think they've got it quite right yet, because in some states, for instance, South Australia, if I own a particular rifle, I'm allowed to print parts for it. So printing a rifle or printing a firearm is illegal. But if I own and I'm licensed to own a certain firearm, I can print parts for it.
Yeah, right.
Oh, okay.
Which is quite sensible, I think. But it doesn't take that into account, the new act. So they've got to work their way back around that. And they played around. Mostly the federal powers are very limited in the area of firearms. Mostly it relates to import restrictions and things like that. And they've injected themselves into the import process. So whereas previously they allowed you to import things, this is particularly true for wholesalers. They allowed the wholesalers to get a certificate from their local police saying, yes, it's fine for him to have, they are licensed to introduce 3,000 Class A rifles, and that would be enough. Now there's a federal process that's involved in that as well. So you've got to get sign off from the feds, not just from the local police. That's particularly true for straight pulls. They're calling them assisted action repeating rifles, which is your release and lever release. Yeah. And also for handguns. So they've injected themselves into that process. They are saying to us that we had a meeting with the minister yesterday. What day is it? That was Wednesday. So today's Thursday. That was Wednesday. We had a meeting with the minister, and he outlined we outlined a few of the issues that were still live as a result of what they did. He's committed to working our way through them and rectify them, which has been good. But they did clarify the process for shipments that are already on the water or that have recently arrived. They're trying to make those processes as streamlined as possible. And then the other thing they did say was that they wouldn't restrict, if a straight pull is still legal in Queensland, for instance, they will then allow them to be imported into Queensland, just not into states where they're not allowed. So Western Australia and New South Wales have banned them, but Queensland, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, Northern Territory, they're still legal. So you should be able to get them still from there.
Okay, so they'll just be an item. So they'll be legally imported. They just will have a restriction on their sale.
Yeah, well, they sort of depending on which state you're in, they're still unrestricted in sale, but there's new provisions about the import and new processes for the wholesaler to satisfy that the end user is not someone in basically not someone in New South Wales or Western Australia,
Yeah.
but in fact someone in a state that's legal. Yeah. So
That is complicated, isn't it?
Oh,
it
wow.
really is. Yeah, they've really complicated it a lot.
So,
And they
So
didn't
that,
need to.
let's stay on that subject for half
yeah,
a
that
second.
did. That's one question we were mulling over. If straight pulls are effectively banned at a federal level, does
Yeah.
that mean? But they're not banned at a Queensland level. Does
Yeah.
that? How does that affect in a federal buyback?
So the buyback is going to be negotiated on a state by state basis, essentially. So there's going to be a whole bunch of different buyback
Oh, okay.
arrangements depending on the state that you're in. And we did try to get an amendment up in the parliament where they would have been forced to. The big danger is they try and do a Western Australian style buyback, which is, they just basically made up prices as opposed to fair market value. So we did try to get an amendment that would make it fair market value, but that didn't get accepted. So it's sort of a licorice all sorts, really. And the processes that are still to come is still be a national cabinet meeting where they're going to try and come up with a new firearms agreement, basically, that they want to try and standardise as much as possible. But it's looking really, really hard when Queensland, Northern Territory and Tasmania are saying we're not going to do anything. Victoria and South Australia umming and ahhing a bit. Now, I think South Australia, they've got their election coming up. They'll probably fold after the election, but it remains to be seen. I mean, in the middle of an election environment, that could change. And Victoria also has an election at the end of the year. So, both of those places, Victoria in particular, could have a lot of pressure put on to not change the laws. And that would be interesting to see how that plays out and where it all goes.
Let me run another couple of scenarios past you that we were talking about earlier. This is related to the straight pulls and state-by-state rules.
Yeah.
The first thing that comes to mind is, I live in Queensland. I have a straight pull. I do a lot of hunting down in New South Wales. I license state forest hunting. Obviously, my straight pull I can't take to New South Wales anymore to do that. I'm assuming, or we're assuming also, that means if I want to travel to Victoria, where they are legal to use, transporting through New South Wales is going to be a challenge. You're going to have to fly over the top of it rather than drive through it. You may not have the answer to that, but these are the messy things that are going to come up now that we have different rules state by state. And of course, until your comment 2 seconds ago that said that, they're trying to ban them federally, or they've banned them federally. I don't think that's the right word, is it? They haven't banned federally.
They've restricted, isn't it?
Yeah, restricted the import, I think, is the best way to say it. Yeah.
But to say that we can still get them in Queensland would mean that I can fly to New Zealand and get it back again.
Yes.
Because you're crossing through federal boundary.
Yeah,
now.
you should be able to do that.
Right.
Bringing it back into the country should be okay as well.
Because you're bringing it back into Queensland.
Yeah.
So make sure your flight is not
I'm pretty sure you'll be able to transit through Sydney as well. Yeah. I mean, remembering it's through baggage at that point, and you'll be on the air side of your baggage will be on the air side of an airport. So I imagine it's going to be okay. But
so getting rerouted is not going to cause issues. It
can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's happened to me more than once.
Yeah.
I get dropped in another city because there's something going wrong, and your flight has to do
stay overnight, and you got to collect all your baggage and everything else.
And now I'm illegally carrying something. I mean, I guess you're just going to deal with the police at the airport at that point and say, "What do I do?"
Yeah.
But forward 5 years from now, where these get a little bit hazy, and it's probably only through educating ourselves through the podcast that I've come to understand that folding stock rifles, you can't get, you're not allowed to use those in New South Wales. I don't have one, but if I decided to buy one in Queensland, I don't know whether I would have looked deep enough to know that I couldn't take it to New South Wales. So you get yourself in a whole bunch of trouble by not knowing each state law.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure of them. I'm not sure of the law about travelling from, Queensland through to Victoria and travelling through New South Wales.
It's a long way round.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I can understand how it could be, like, you could be pinged for that, but I can also see how, well, you're licensed to own it, and you're licensed to own it in Queensland. It's your property, and you are, in fact, transiting through.
And if you've got some way of demonstrating that you are in transit, i.e., you booked a forest in
Victorian permits, and
and you got Victorian permit, and you booked a.
Let's not assume yet. It's a good one to
figure
out.
It's certainly a. I mean, you could go through what's known cameras Cameron's Corner crossing if you wanted to.
It's a long way around.
Down the
Down
dog
to
fence, down South
Strzelecki and then
Australia.
into through South Australia, I suppose,
Dog
if you
fence is
wanted
going to
to.
get pretty well used.
Well, at least there's some camel hunting on the way down there.
That's
No,
right.
it's
Through the
not bad, true.
Strzelecki or something will become the major highway for sambar hunters.
Well, there's the confusion around that particular
Yeah.
change.
Thank-
I'm glad that the whole competition shooting vest thing got cleared up, because that was looking just
Well,
ridiculous.
it made them look stupid. In the end, it made them look stupid.
Yeah.
I mean, Beretta very kindly made me up a
I noticed those
shooting
vests.
band vest.
Yeah, on the back it had banned Olympic clothing.
Yeah,
They'd got that embroidered on the back, and
good on them.
I managed to wear it for about 5 minutes before Bridget Mackenzie, Senator Mackenzie, grabbed it. I never got it.
I saw that in the news.
I have exactly the same shooting vest, so I picked it straight away and thought, that's great. That's fine. Okay, so what else has happened? There's other things that are going on at the federal level, I mean, because like you said, they didn't have a whole lot of stuff they could do, but what else have they done that we're not aware of?
The carriage service, the handguns, they made some change. Again, they ejected themselves. There was a lot of backwards and forwards between people about whether handgun importation was going to be banned for sport shooting or not. In the end, it's not, but it was, because the process is so sort of circuitous. It's hard to actually work your way through the process to work out whether you can import them for sporting shooting. Turns out in the end you can, so that's fine. And I'm just trying to think what else there was. Yeah, the reloading is fine now. They amended the wording of that clause, and so now reloading ammunition is taken out, so you can look up reloading gear without any problem. Yeah, so that'll be fine.
And the license,
oh, that's right. Yes,
the licensing for citizens, is that done at a federal level, or is that still a state-based decision?
No, it's still state. Licensing is state. Part of the bit that did involve the federal was the background checks using intelligence checks. So now the federal government has opened up the AusCheck system for states to use, which means basically they can put a name in there, and if it's on a watch list, it will pop up and say watch list, something, or basically a computer says no. And then the state will say, sorry, not a fit and proper person. Now, the big change there was that they removed the merits-based test, which is the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. So if you want to appeal your if you have an adverse intelligence finding, you can appeal it, but you've got to go to a judicial review, which is through a court, basically, which is more complicated, more expensive, a lengthier process. So it's a lot harder, and there's a lot of it's actually quite a complicated area. So ASIO are very keen that people don't know they're being surveilled. So that means that if the police get a flag on AUSTRAC, they don't have to tell you that was the problem. They can just refuse your license. You can then seek a review, but the only review you can get is a judicial review at the state level, I think. In which case, the fact that but this is where it sort of gets murky, is because if it's an Administrative Appeals Tribunal review, they can deal with the fact that intelligence was involved and make a ruling without telling the defendant that intelligence was involved and protect that. Whereas a court has discovery and rules of evidence and everything else, where it would come out that they are being surveilled. So they would have to, if they get refused. I mean, basically, what ASIO was worried is that if someone who was a terrorist wanted to know if ASIO knew about them or not, they would just apply for a firearms license and see whether they got it, and whether they got a finding, an adverse intelligence finding that said, no, you can't have it. But I think what's going to happen is they're going to apply for a license. They're going to find that they haven't got it, and they're going to say, okay, I'm going to go to court, and they're going to take it to court to see whether the ASIO is watching them or not, and that's going to come out. So I'm not sure they can avoid it anyway, but it is a complex area and it's very difficult. And the fact is, part of the problem at Bondi was they knew about this guy, but they didn't know he had a firearms license, and the police were working out whether to give him a firearms license and may not have known that ASIO knew about him. So finding a solution to that is really important. Protecting the source is really important, because these people who are intelligence sources are helping us as Australians to keep us safe. So we want to protect them. And we don't want terrorists to know that they're being surveilled, so that we can find bigger networks and everything else, and pull down a whole network rather than just one or two terrorists and leave the rest of the network there. So it's a very complicated area. It's very complex. And that's exactly the reason why the bill shouldn't have been rushed, and it should have been really carefully thought through so that they could deal with all of these issues and work out a way that might work.
So you said a few minutes ago that you've been talking to the minister about changes. Obviously, these have gone through. There was a lot of confusion on the socials. There was some posts saying that it's been referred to committees. There's been other posts saying that it's passed both houses. I think we can assume to say it's passed both houses.
It has. And so there was a motion to move it to a committee, and that motion was defeated. So,
so
that
how
means
much? How much back and forward is there now? We're saying that they've been rushed through and they shouldn't have been because of the complexities of what you just discussed, but there must be a process now to fine tune things and to soak up more information and get it right, or is it likely just
we talked to the minister yesterday, and he's put us in touch with some of his officials so that, his public servants, so we can just work through more. It's about, especially on the importation side, it's about making sure that people can import things into the country still, that importation flow happens. And then we've asked him to have a look at the definition, that wording around the carriage service provisions so that can be tightened up and made more specific. So it's really focused on only those people who are trying to illegally print guns and not on the legitimate uses of 3D printers. And there's actually not many legitimate uses of 3D printing, but there are some. So if you're a manufacturer, you should be able to use it, and you should be able to look up information and print files. And being a manufacturer is a licensed process, so police know who you are and everything else. And for instance, in South Australia, if you want to go about printing a part for a license you own, a firearm you own, as you're allowed to do under South Australian law, well, you should be able to do that as well. So there's a little bit to work on there, and then it's more the regulation, making sure the regulations are written in a way that facilitates the smooth importation of firearms while still allowing the Commonwealth to have information about where firearms are going and who's importing them and everything else.
It sounds like a lot of the changes that have been made at this federal level could tie up some minorities and knots for the majority of licensed shooters out there. It's not going to have a massive immediate impact on us. It's really going to come down to the states, isn't it?
The main battle is still at the state level. So state by state, we're going to have to fight our way through them and do what we can. We might all end up moving to Tasmania or Queensland, it's like...
As long as you bring your hunting ability, or the skills to get the government to give us access, that would be great. You'd be most welcome.
All the shooters are moving to shooting states, and everybody else can.
Can you imagine? All right, and obviously there was a lot of you updated us really regularly throughout this process, and there was a lot of thanks that went out to the firearms community for writing letters and doing this. How much of an impact? I know you've stated this in your updates, but a lot of people may not have seen those. How did that get received? What are you seeing?
So I think as the week went on, it started like the government seemed pretty confident of what they were doing, and they were just charging ahead. And as the week went on, they were it got more difficult for them, and they could feel it, and they understood what was going on. I mean, I think they've seriously... There's a federal Labor member in New South Wales, a seat of Hunter, who is named for Dan Rapacholi.
Dan.
He's the Olympic shooter, ex-Olympic shooter.
That was a very tight competition between him and the One Nation candidate at the last federal election. It's traditionally been a very strong Labor seat. It was held by Joel Fitzgibbon for a very long time, and he was a minister and everything before. I think his father held it at some point as well in the past. And it's been a Labor seat. It's a coal mining area. It's been a Labor seat for a really long time. Now, with the sort of change in the way we generate power and the reduction in the influence of the coal industry in that area, plus the rise of One Nation, that was a really tight electorate in the last election. And I think they've severely damaged them. And I think they've made it much more likely that One Nation will be very, very competitive at the next election in Hunter. So, there's a couple of places around the country where that's true. I think there'll probably be seats in Queensland that they might struggle with. There might even be some country or regional seats in Victoria, like around Ballarat and that sort of area, where they might struggle up against One Nation. And that's part of the reason I think you saw the Nats and the Libs come out, so particularly the Nationals, who have been great the whole way through Western Australia, New South Wales and here. But the Libs were terrible in Western Australia. They were terrible in New South Wales and at the state level. But at the federal level, right across the country, they actually voted against the firearm changes. So they were okay this time around, but it's taken them 2 elections to get their head around it. Sorry, two states to get their head around it. And so I think there's some serious consequences for the government, and they're just starting to work that out. But the writing and everything else it actually had an effect, because the government, they removed the clothing side of things, the ammunition stuff. That they just pulled it out. They gave up on that entirely. They gave ground on speed loaders for competition. They gave ground on that's for pistol competition. Gave ground on speed loaders for gallery rifle. I think you've got to check that, because that's still a bit up in the air. And then they tightened up some definitions here and there on the carriage service and all that sort of stuff. So they were backpedaling, and the rate of inflow of messages and emails actually helped them to do that. But in the end, they ran out of time. I think had they sort of given themselves a week rather than a few days to do all this, maybe another week or two, I reckon we could have had a big impact, and we could have really dealt with a lot of stuff much more cleanly. And I think we could have got much better law at the end of it, had they given themselves an extra week or two to do everything they did.
Okay, I suppose one of the other questions I was going to ask, and this is more of again that general question. We've spoken in the past about this idea from 3 to 5%. And
yeah.
I mean, I lived through 96, and and here we are again. And personally, any buyback is a loss as far as I'm concerned. I don't see, buybacks are not good. There's no way you can dress a buyback as good. You might be able to argue it's not bad, but I think that's splitting hairs. It's more the fact that there seems to be a lot more, I suppose, and maybe it's through the mechanisms like social media and so on, but there's a lot more, I suppose, anger, if you will, in the shooting community. Do you think that's going to play out in the polls? Do you think that it is an issue?
I absolutely do think it's an issue. I'm not sure if it's going to turn up in the polls or whether it will just turn up at the election. But for instance, I think in New South Wales,
I should have probably said that better. I meant at the election, not in the polls. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I think you're accurate. Actually, the only one poll that counts is the election. Yeah, and I think you'll find it'll have a more interesting impact at the state level. So New South Wales has an election in March 2027, and I agree with you that people are really angry. I mean, I'm angry in a way that I haven't been for a very long time about something a government's done. And it's because everybody knows that it's fundamentally unfair. Like, what they're doing is unfair. It's not us. It wasn't anything we did or any licensed shooter did. It was a failure of any, there's sort of law abiding. The terrorists went out of the way to use the law against us, right, by arming themselves, by using the law. And the law, because the processes weren't properly applied, we were vulnerable. Now, because what annoys me is the police didn't do their job, and we all have to pay the price. And no police have been sacked. It's the same in Western Australia. Like, no police were sacked with that Floriat shooting that led to their laws, and yet 15 people knew that guy was a threat to his wife and daughter and had firearms, and they didn't do anything about it. So I'm just getting increasingly angry that coppers are getting away with their mismanagement of the law, and we pay the price. And so I'm getting angry about that, and I think you're right. That anger is spreading right throughout the firearms community, and I think the general population also agree. I mean, if you ask them, they'll say yes, gun laws should be tightened. But if you say were guns the problem, most people would say no. The fact that some guy was a terrorist and was allowed, and they knew about him and they didn't stop it, that's the problem. And so I think there's some sympathy in the general population. There's certainly not the same driving desire amongst the general population to tighten up on firearms laws that there was after 96. I remember that as well. It was like a palpable thing. Like, everybody, even shooters, agreed that we needed to do something about it.
I think that's another point that's different, is that in 96 there was almost kind of like a reluctant acceptance that it was such a bad thing that you've got to kind of take a bit of a hit type, there was but I also think there was a message behind that, is that there was a kind of, if you take the hit now, things will when things settle down, they'll kind of get better. And obviously that hasn't happened. And I'm wondering if, I'm more and more thinking this kind of response is a making of the government. The anger is a response of created by the government. And whilst they keep saying, it's right-wing politics and all that and things like that, I think it's more the fact that people are just annoyed to a really high level. They're angry that they've been treated so poorly.
Yeah, and that's exactly right.
And to add to that, the process that they went through, guillotining the debate.
Yeah, I was about to say exactly
just
that.
reeked of overstepping the mark and not doing the right thing by the general public, and that has infuriated people.
And that's exactly right too. And this is yeah. So I deeply understand, and it's making the SSAA, and I know some of the other organisations as well, think really deeply about whether we're going to remain these apolitical organisations that haven't really involved themselves too much in politics, right? And coming back to the 3 to 5% mark, I think, that's just reinforced my view that there's just not enough of us. The fact that we've been so unable to change any minds really in a genuine, like we haven't got any major concessions, and that governments feel they can rush these things through and trample over people, is because there's just not enough of us. There's not enough shooters, and we've got to fix that. Got to make it so that governments know there will be real pain if they try and stop. And look, I still think there will be. I think in New South Wales, it's hard to know because Minns is popular. It's hard to overcome a popular premier, and he might actually increase his majority. It's very narrow at the moment. But I think you'll be lucky to have a narrow win next time around. And there is a chance that One Nation could hold the balance of power in New South Wales, and that I think while the coalition might suffer more, I think Labor is going to suffer more than they think in terms of losses to One Nation, because there's the outer suburbs of of Sydney and the big cities, and then there's the regional seats that Labor hold, and it's quite possible for One Nation to surge in those seats and defeat the Labor Party, not just knock out the Libs from number 2, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Well, on that, sorry, Mark.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point because, we tend to talk about city and country, but there is a huge population that kind of live in between, the CBD and the black stump. I mean, that's why, some of the biggest gun shops in the country are in urban areas.
Yeah,
because there's a hell of a lot of people who shoot. Brisbane SSAA is a huge club. I think it's got 40,000 members. So there's a whole group of people, I think, that have been seen as kind of dispersed who have been hard done by here. I think politically it's going to, maybe I'm thinking, or maybe I'm hoping that it's going to have political ramifications, which it didn't in the past.
Yeah, although I don't know if you remember the 98 elections, both Queensland and federal, immediately after 96. I mean, John Howard lost a lot of seats in 98 and had a narrow victory in 98 and lost a huge number of seats in Queensland where there was particular anger about the gun buyback and everything else. And then in the Queensland election in 1998, the coalition lost a heap of, I think it was the coalition, like the One Nation won 11 seats. Anyway.
Yeah, that's when they have 11 or 14. That was when they had the biggest number in the Queensland Parliament.
Yeah, well, that's right. It was
98.
They peaked on the back of that anger, at immigration and a bunch of other things, plus firearms. So I think, and the New South Wales Liberal Party, I think, is damaged, like heavily damaged by the way it behaved during the debates just before Christmas. I would expect in the New South Wales election in 2027 that One Nation is going to do very well, and it will be interesting to see whether that Labor Party wins with a good majority, but the Liberal Party is almost wiped out, or whether there's sort of a minority government with balance of power held by One Nation. That's a possibility, I think.
It's been a fascinating backstory to the whole saga, watching the rise of One Nation come up through all of this. We were talking about it earlier, with Nationals breaking away today. You can almost, some of us will, and some of us don't know anything about politics, so we just look at it and go, well, Barnaby left, and is he still buddies with Little Proud, and is this an orchestrated thing, and what's going on? What's the prediction? Can we ask Tom for a prediction of what you think is going to happen in the short term?
I'll tell you what, there was a bit of chatter in Canberra that that the Nationals might form a coalition with One Nation.
We've been a lot of chatter about it.
It would sort of make sense.
Would that be like an agreement not to compete with each other?
And I think if they could do that, then that would be very interesting, right? And it would make sense for the Nats to do that.
Yeah.
because
We won't
makes,
run candidates against you. You don't run candidates against us.
and it would be very clever. And because actually, I think the real potential for One Nation is actually in the cities now. They can win in those outer suburbs of cities. And so, a prediction, you mean federally, or what am I predicting?
I'm predicting what's happening now with. I'd like to know what you think is going to happen with the coalition. Like we've had some stuff happen in the last couple of days, and then is the opportunity for One Nation to create these alliances.
Yeah, I would say that they will be formally split, and the Nationals will take a much more independent line on things, but that they will still end up voting quite closely with the Libs. And the Libs, now that they are free of the coalition, will probably go more to the left and try and win back those teal seats.
Teal seats that they lost on the Morrison, yeah.
And I think they will be heavily damaged. I don't think the Liberal Party understands that you can't keep imitating the Labor Party and expect to do well. And so I think the smart move for the Libs would be to abandon the teal seats and concentrate on the outer suburbs of the cities. I don't think they are capable of doing that. So I think the Liberal Party is going to be very vastly diminished. I think the National Party may maybe even get a bit bigger, and they might find their identity again. And I think One Nation will start to win seats around the country. I suspect in regional areas first, but possibly some in the outer suburbs, Western Sydney maybe, or there's Cronulla Shire area maybe, that sort of way. It's hard to know where they'll pop their head up, but you sort of think western suburbs of Brisbane, maybe around, is it Logan out in the west? Is that
West
that
of
sort of
Brisbane.
area? Yeah, Mount Druitt. Is it Mount Druitt out there as well? Or am I thinking Sydney?
That's Sydney.
That's Sydney. All right. What's out west? What are the suburbs out west?
Ipswich, Logan.
Yeah, that sort of way. Yeah. So I think that's ripe territory for One Nation as well if they play their cards right. So it'll be interesting.
Pauline came from Ipswich. That's where she's from.
That's right.
Where the fish and chip shop was. Yeah, it's where the fish and chip shop was.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. She won her seat in 90. She was elected.
Yeah.
Has she been around that long?
Yeah, 30. And that's the other thing to remember about One Nation is they're not a new party anymore. Like they are an old party that's been around a long time. It's like the Greens. The Greens have been around since the sort of late 80s. And maybe even early 80s they were formed. They've got, 20 years, 40 years of politics behind them. And it's only after about 30 years they started to get really successful and start winning seats everywhere and even lower house seats. So after that 30-year time frame, it might be time for One Nation to start winning some lower house seats.
Not to put you in the spot, because this is repeating something you said, but certainly it does appear that the SSAA is getting a little bit more political.
Yeah.
And it does appear that you're also working more closely with other organisations.
Absolutely.
Which is new from the outside anyway.
Yeah, no, it's new. It is new. It's so to be honest, it was SIFA, the Shooting Industry Foundation of Australia, that's the major importers. They pulled everyone together in May of last year and said, why don't we all have a meeting and see if we can start to work together, because it's crazy that we're so dispersed and we're not talking to each other. So we turned up in Canberra in May, was us, Shooters Union, Australian Clay Target Association, IPSC, NRAA, Field and Game. There's one more.
ADA.
Sporting Clays and ADA. Yeah, that's right. Sean Kilkenny was there as well. So we all came there. We've started to work together. Had another meeting in the meantime. Where we laid some ground rules out and how we were going to start working together, and are really starting to feel it out. We weren't rushing it. Then this happened, but because we'd already established those lines of communication, we were able to start to pull together things pretty quickly. And Shooters Union, who are a very political organisation, I mean, that's what they are, like an advocacy group. They don't have ranges or anything else. They don't run competitions. They just do political advocacy around shooting. So they have a good infrastructure behind them. They've got people they work with who do campaigning. They've got their staff for the social media and everything else. They've got media people. Like that's actually quite a interesting organisation. And so we've been working together quite well for the last couple of months, really. Well, it's actually just over a month, to be honest. It seems longer. But once this all started gathering momentum, we were able to start talking very quickly and pulled together a bit of a campaign, and it's been co-funded by just about all the organisations that what's been going on. And yeah, it's an unusual level of cooperation. I think it's been good. I really enjoyed it, and I think we can keep going in that vein if we sit back, think about it a bit more, take another step. Think out how this worked and what we would do differently and how we'd improve that cooperation. And then I think we can keep going in that vein. I certainly want to. I know Shooters Union are keen to, and I think the others are as well. It's a lot harder for the smaller organisations. So those like ADA and IPSC and Sporting Clays and all of those guys, they're relatively small organisations compared to us and Shooters Union. And Shooters Union got tens of thousands of members, and particularly they're large in Queensland. We've got over 100 and we're about 150,000 members now. So not including Queensland, but if you add Queensland in, we're probably about 220,000 now. So it's easier for us and Shooters Union to pull things together and to get things moving and to maybe fund a few things than it is for the smaller organisations. But we've been trying to bring the smaller organisations along. One thing we've been able to do is we can work out the messaging and provide the messaging, and then everyone can filter it out networks and use it.
Well, it's almost the other way. It seems that because the vendors don't tend to get their voice out directly. This is what CIFA was for, right? And you guys being part of that community, it almost seems like that you're voicing on behalf of, and SU was as well, and ADA to an extent. Maybe it's just my channels.
Yeah, no, the three of us, for ADA in Victoria is a thing. I was sort of covering large chunks of the country, and then and SU particularly in Queensland and a little bit in New South Wales as well. We sort of were between us. We're able to. None of us turned down a media interview, and we're doing an incredible number of interviews and talking to the media. And we had a sort of a very unified message that we were pushing out, across that. Yeah, it was, and CIFA, we were able to represent them to a certain extent. I mean, they had James out there doing stuff that was specifically related to dealers and everything else, but we were able to, somewhere someone was on the ground that was able to fill the message as needed. And I was able to do work. I didn't sort of speak publicly on CIFA's behalf, but I was able to help with the media in New South Wales while that was going on. Go down, talk to journalists, keep reinforcing the messages that CIFA were pushing out. And behind the scenes, CIFA had a great amount of information and that they were able to provide. Like that, they were able to provide the estimate of the cost of a buyback, and we wouldn't have been able to do that. And none of the other shooting organisations would have been able to do that, but the vendors could. And they had that information. So I was able to push that out because they'd given me the information to do it. And they were pushing it as well, but I was able to be there on the ground, answer questions and give quotes if needed. So it was, well, I mean, I haven't really been around for more than about 18 months, but it was as unified as I've ever seen anyone at these organisations working together, but given its limited background. But it took the load off. It really made it better that we weren't battling each other. We were just working together.
Yeah, I think to Mark's point, it's obvious that SAA and others have showed up to voice the concerns and to keep us all up to date. I think the first comments that came out straight after the attack were probably more along the lines of, I wonder if SAA will show up. And I think you've silenced quite a few of those critics now because you've been out there, you've been everywhere. It's almost been a case of get up in the morning, grab the popcorn, open Facebook, see what Tom's talking about today, because there's been so much going on. But it's been good to have a reliable and a regular source of data coming in, because there's so many things that are popping up that you just don't know what to believe. It's been
and it's sort of a good way to, it sort of helps me think it through too in some ways and summarize it. But it's been, you'll still see comments, what did you do in Western Australia, right? And everything that we did in we'll put it this way, we did everything in Western Australia that we're doing now in New South Wales and federally. We just didn't tell people about it. Like, we weren't doing videos, we weren't there, I mean, in Western Australia, Paul Fitzgerald, who's our president over there, did a lot of media interviews, but he just didn't do those little video updates and stuff like that. And that's really the only difference, is I've been sort of out there telling people what we've been doing as well as doing it. But in Western Australia, we still did it. We put $250,000 into that campaign to try and, prevent those laws and get involved in the election campaign over there. But we didn't talk about it, and now we're doing the same thing, and we're putting thousands of dollars tens of thousands of dollars into this campaign so far. Like, it's going to be bigger. We're going to do more. But the difference is that I'm doing those little videos. They're very rough. They're me doing selfie videos, basically, just trying to give people a summary of where we're at. And it's sort of, in some ways, it's been the only way we've been able to communicate because of the way things have been moving and the rapidity with things have been moving. I mean, that bill, it was like the federal parliament, for instance, was released on a Tuesday morning, was updated over the weekend, and then a third version was introduced on the following Tuesday. So the bill that went to parliament was the third version of the bill in less than a week. And at one point, it looked like there was going to be amended on the floor of the parliament by the government. So it wasn't even going to be other people's amendments. It would have been government amendments on the floor, but they managed to avoid that. So, it was moving so quickly that those little video updates were pretty much the only way to keep people updated because they didn't have time to type out the letters and type out the emails and everything.
But if it was the only way to get it out, it was the right way to get it out because that's how we all consume information now.
Yeah. That's right.
Through those updates. So that's great. My last question anyway for the minute. Where is the fight going next? So
probably south.
I was going to say Queensland stated that they're not following suit yet. Who knows what's going to happen in the medium term? Where you're saying is it's all going to happen.
So I'd say Queensland, Northern Territory, and Tasmania all look pretty stable at the moment. The next time is South Australia because they've got an election coming up in March. So the next step will be to try and work out what both of the major parties are planning to do after the election and try and get that out of them, maybe take some action. So it's still a little bit unclear how we'll go in South Australia and what we'll do, but we've got to try and draw the parties out to say what they want to do and then take action after that and vote accordingly. Given the compressed timeframes, it's going to be hard. Also, Premier Malinauskas here in South Australia is very popular, really going to be hard to get over the top of him no matter what happens. But we'll try and make it an issue and we'll try and get them if we can get them to guarantee to do an inquiry and work out how they can tighten up laws and stop. I really think the approach of Premier Chris Philly in Queensland is right, which is we're going to only make changes that will make it harder for terrorists and criminals to get firearms. That's the way to deal with it. The number of guns and the type of guns people have is largely immaterial if you can prevent the wrong people having them. So I think that's right. And then after that, Victoria. I think Victoria is actually the key because they've got an election in November. The government there is going to struggle to get re-elected. They could still win. But it's going to be very hard for them. And the interesting thing is that I wouldn't automatically think that the Labor Party would want to do much there, right? Because they know they're vulnerable. They just don't want another group of people being pissed off with them. And it may be that they decide they're not going to do anything. They'll take a more Queensland line. And if they do that, then shooters, in my opinion, should reward them for doing the right thing. And it could be, and look, this is very, very early, so it's not a promise or anything like that. It's just a discussion point. But what would be a bit of a turn up for and would make people take notice is if shooters rallied in behind the Labor Party and got them re-elected if they did the right thing. And then people would say, okay, well, because the problem at the moment, I think, is everyone sort of assumes that shooters all vote for the Liberal Party or One Nation, and it's just not true. I mean, there's lots of Labor voters, there's lots of Liberal voters. There's a good blend. We all know the mix, because we know people we shoot with, and we know some people vote certain ways and other people vote others. But if everyone voted the same way and it was for a group that had supported us, we could make a big difference and would have some unusual impacts, and that would make people take notice.
Yeah, well, I think if the communication stays up, and the messaging keeps coming out to the community, they're not going to forget so quickly.
No. So I might be going to visit the Victorian Premier one day soon.
Yeah, you can do that.
But that's really saying, what you're saying there is vote for your sport.
Exactly.
Forget about the jersey. Which one says yes to what you want? Okay, that's where my vote goes. And if the next time around you say no, but the other guy says yes, well,
we're going there.
We're going that way.
And I think right now that it is so raw and sensitive that people are starting to think that way. It's keeping that thought in mind in November. It will be the trick.
Yeah, it's like I think, and we've been able. This is a bit of a luxury, the position that we're currently in. That up until now, where It's been like, well, you can vote for the economy, you can vote for healthcare, you can vote for the environment and do whatever you want, because there's been this bipartisanship about shooting as if the laws are working, leave them as they are. But now
that's
it's,
changing.
and I think that's changing, and I think we have to adapt with it. And that means, we've got to become a lot more active. But it's exactly what I'm saying, Mark. What you said is, we're just going to vote for the people who do the best for shooting, and we're going to take shooting into account as our primary judgment on who we're going to vote for
Yep.
when we go to the polls. Now, so I think, I think that's what we're going to have to get to, and we're going to have to do a hard-headed assessment. And we've also got to start remembering, you vote for people who've actually taken actions. Someone in Parliament who's actually done something is more valuable than someone outside Parliament who wants to get elected, who says, I'll do anything, I'll do exactly what you want. So if someone's got a track record and has voted the right way continuously, we got to reward them. And you've got to back them up with a vote, because they've already done the right thing, and that they're prepared to do the right thing. And talk's cheap. Right? Talk's cheap.
I was
It's
going to say,
interesting. There's in
Yeah.
Queensland at the moment, Labor are running this, what's it? Soft on guns or something like that is soft on crime or something. You can't be hard. You can't be hard on crime but soft on guns.
Yeah.
And I actually think they are basically driving more and more people away from them who are going, yeah, that's not right.
Yeah.
I think it's a bad political move on their part, but they jumped in it, lock, stock, and barrel. But that's their decision.
Yeah, I think they've misread it. I think
they've really misread it, and they should have just said, "We'll just shut up about this one."
Yeah, I think Albanese's misread the mood as well, to be honest. Yeah, because he was hammering the guns and avoiding a royal commission. Got forced into the royal commission, and now he's had to do the guns. And I don't think he's going to get all the people who think you should make gun laws tougher. I'm not going to reward him for it. Like they either vote for him already.
That's right.
They're going to get angry at him for other things. Whereas the people, hopefully, I suppose what we're trying to do is get our members and all shooters actually in the country to remember that and vote according to their sport, not something else. So,
well, if they approve my citizenship application, I will be voting with my anger.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing too. Like, I know that we've been representing to the government that we've got this huge number of Kiwis, South Africans, people who are permanent residents and who make great volunteers at our clubs or contribute in a really meaningful way. And, you're going to just knock them out with this citizenship thing unless you can make some exceptions for permanent residents or someone, because you can't just blatantly knock them out. You're just going to do a lot of damage if you do that. I mean, perhaps one of the silver linings out of this is there might be a greater emphasis on Australian manufacturing and everything else, but it's a pretty tough silver lining, so we're just starting to get into a good spot with, a lot of variety, people starting to get into it. There's some really nice firearms coming into the country. It felt like we could just about make some progress to start to, free things up a little bit, and then this happened. So it was sort of very discouraging in a way.
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole suppressor conversation that was happening. That's never going to happen.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, although I think that can still go on, and just give it a bit of time. They did say make some changes to suppressor imports to say that they had to have a serial number on them, basically. But that's it. When I first saw it, I thought, here we go. They're going to just completely ban suppressors. But all they've done is say, you have to have a serial number on it, which is fine. Like, who cares about that? But I'm hoping that we can have that discussion as part of this and just say, well, hang on a sec. Let's have a think about if we're rewriting the National Firearms Agreement, let's have a think about that. Like, why suppressors don't need to be in there. Not a police force in the country thinks that they need to be in there. So why don't we just pull them out? And why don't we make it that certain hunters, for instance, who have the permission of a landholder have rights to use Category C firearms, for instance, on that property that they have permission for, or something like that. Like, how do we change things up so it works both ways instead of just one?
I mean, if we're tightening up who can have a firearm, then why couldn't suppressors be, part of that? When I lived in the UK, and I don't know what it's like now, this was 14 years ago, you had to have a suppressor on your firearms certificate on your firearms license to say, so you were a fit and proper person, you had been assessed to have a firearm, and you're allowed to have a suppressor. So if we're tightening up our laws here in Australia about who can have a firearm, why don't we include suppressors as part of that?
Yeah, it's a good idea. And I mean, in the UK, they've freed it up just last year. I think they freed it up even more. Like,
yeah, it's almost the other way. You actually have, in certain areas, you have to have it. So it's now you can't hunt without a suppressor. It's like that it's a public safety issue around noise and stuff like that. You have to use a suppressor.
I was talking to someone the other day and I said, I wonder what would happen if they managed to make bullets quieter. It's that ridiculous. It's that ridiculous that we're talking about the noise of a projectile. Anyway, we're not going to get anywhere with that.
And that's a topic. The most frustrating about all this conversation is that you want to slip into logic, and you know that that's actually not the way to go.
No, we don't. Well, your logic.
It's right. It's like, you just want to say, okay, so can you show me on a scale where I become a radical fundamentalist depending on the number of firearms is it you're okay at 5, but then after 6 you kind of start getting a bit kooky, and then you get up to here, you go. I mean,
New South Wales
just drives you mad.
There's an element of silliness about New South Wales. How did this guy have 6? Well, we better change it. How many did he take to the shooting? 4. Okay, that's the limit. We're not going to allow any more than 4. I mean, that's not how they arrived at it, obviously. But even the limit they put in wouldn't have helped. Do you know what I mean? It was just so ridiculous.
It would have been better off taking more magazines than more guns.
And this language about dangerous guns, you just really want to kind of go.
Yeah,
so what car did he drive there? What car did they go there in?
A Hyundai XL. But
okay, so that's now a dangerous car. Did they speak on a mobile phone? What's the model? We want to identify it as a dangerous mobile phone. It's just
Sure, I'm sure it was a Samsung.
Drives me crazy.
Surely not, dear. All right, cool. Well, we might call it quits there, and let you have what's left of your evening back. What is it? 11 o'clock over there. So thank you for staying up late and coming and chatting to us. Everyone's been looking forward to an update. So appreciate it, you and your time, and your generosity again.
Yes, no Tom, as always, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. It's helping us cut through the chaff. I won't say what really cutting through, but
I know what you meant.
Chaff. Okay, thanks again. Catch you later.
Rightio, that's a wrap from the team at the Hunters Campfire. We hope you had a laugh, learned something useful, or at least were a little bit entertained. And you feel a little bit more pumped up for your next hunting, shooting, or outdoor misadventure. As always, a massive thanks for the support from our friends at SSAA and Beretta Australia. Whether you're out there chasing game, telling lies to your mates around the fire, or just trying to remember where you left your boots. Stay wild, stay curious, and for the love of all things blaze, stay safe, so we can see you back around the fire next time.